They say some homes remember everything. Every sound, every voice, every secret. And sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Tonight's story, The 3 Hours of the Night, is about a woman who found something that never wanted to be found. It was midnight when Zainab sat alone in her old family home. The house was a relic, a time capsule holding generations of joy and sorrow within its creaking walls. Only a single candle flickered beside her on the worn wooden table, its flame dancing and casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to breathe in the corners of the room. The wavering light illuminated an old, leather-bound photo album she held in her lap. Its cover was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. Each picture told a story, capturing moments long gone, faces frozen in time with smiles and serious gazes. They were memories, she told herself, just memories. But that night, as she traced the edges of a faded photograph, the pictures began to look back at her. A faint whisper, like the rustle of dry leaves, coiled through the silence of the room. "Come back. You promised you would return." Zainab froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her hands, which had been steady moments before, began to tremble, making the candle flame stutter wildly. She whipped her head around, her eyes darting into the oppressive darkness that pooled just beyond the candle's glow. The room was empty, utterly, hauntingly empty, except for the old rocking chair in the corner. It moved slowly, deliberately, back and forth, creaking with a rhythm that seemed to mock the frantic beat of her own heart. It was a rhythm she remembered from childhood, but now it sounded like a countdown. 15 years ago, this house was home to a little girl named Mina. She was a quiet, imaginative child who spent most of her time in her own world. Every night, her parents would hear her talking in her room, her soft voice weaving tales to someone they could never see. They dismissed it as a child's fantasy, an imaginary friend, but one night, Mina vanished. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints in the garden, no screams to wake the neighbors. She was simply gone. The townspeople whispered stories, their voices low and fearful. They said a shadow had come for her, a dark entity that lived within the house's ancient walls, and it had taken her away. Now, all these years later, as Zainab sat in that same house, her fingers fumbled to turn the page of the album. There, under a thin protective sheet of plastic, was Mina's photograph. She was smiling, a soft, gentle smile, but her eyes held a depth that seemed impossible for a photograph. They looked alive. They were watching her. As if on cue, the candle flame sputtered, hissed, and died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. The sudden blackness was heavy, suffocating, and in that void something whispered her name, a sound so close it felt like it was breathed directly into her ear. Zainab. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight felt like a blessing, chasing away the lingering dread of the night. Desperate for answers, for anything that might explain the terrifying events, Zainab began searching the house. Tucked away in the back of an old, dusty drawer in the study, her fingers brushed against something small and hard. It was a diary, Mina's diary. Its small lock was broken, and the pages within were brittle and stained with what looked disturbingly like faded red ink. She flipped through the childish scrawl, recounting games and secrets, until she landed on a page that made her blood run cold. A single frantic line was written over and over again, covering the entire page. When the light dies, shadows become real. The words seemed to pulse on the page, a desperate warning from the past. That night, sleep offered no escape. Zainab dreamed she was standing in a vast, desolate graveyard. An unnatural storm was raging. Cold rain soaked her to the bone, and thunder cracked the sky open, each boom shaking the very ground beneath her feet. She was surrounded by tilting, ancient headstones, their inscriptions worn away by time. And then she felt it. A presence. The distinct, chilling sensation of someone standing right behind her. She could feel their breath, cold and damp, on the back of her neck. Her body refused to move, paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt like a physical weight. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline, she forced herself to turn and woke up screaming. the sound tearing from her throat, echoing in the silent, dark bedroom. She lay there, her heart a wild drum in her chest, the dream clinging to her like a shroud. And then she heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Dragging across the wooden floorboards in the hallway outside her room. They were getting closer. Each step was deliberate, measured, a relentless advance that echoed the pounding in her ears. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, with an agonizing squeak. Trembling uncontrollably, Zainab whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible. "Who's there?" Silence answered her, a heavy, expectant silence. And then, a voice not from the hallway, but from right behind her ear, a chillingly familiar child's whisper. "You promised you'd return. Now, it's your turn." A thunderclap exploded outside, rattling the windows. In that split second, instinct took over. Zainab scrambled out of bed and lunged for her bedroom door, yanking it open. She didn't look back. She ran, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor, her only thought to get out, to escape the suffocating presence that filled the house. She reached the front door, her hands fumbling with the lock before she threw it open. But outside, there was nothing. No storm, no thunder, just the gentle, rhythmic sound of rain falling on the porch roof. Confused, she turned, and her gaze fell upon the large glass window beside the door. In its reflective surface, she saw her own panicked face staring back. But she wasn't alone. In the reflection, standing right behind her, was a second figure. A small girl with dark, watching eyes. Mina. A faint, ethereal child's laughter echoed from the glass. "Now you'll stay with me." Forever. Morning came. A weak gray light filtered through the windows of the old house. On the table, the candle had melted into a shapeless pool of wax. The photo album lay open, turned to the last page Mina's picture. On the windowsill, a small white ribbon lay, the kind a little girl might wear in her hair. And written across it, in a dark crimson script that could only be blood, were the words, "Now you belong with me." Zainab's reflection still stared out from the window pane, her eyes wide and vacant. But she wasn't alone anymore. In the glass, standing just behind her, her small hand resting on Zainab's shoulder, stood a little girl, smiling. If you enjoyed this story and you want to hear more chilling tales like it, don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications, because here the night never ends. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the shadows.